I watched $300,000 disappear into my family's lake at sunrise. The floating restaurant tilting, groaning, then sliding under like it was being swallowed, whole chairs and champagne flutes bobbing on the surface, while the HOA president stood waist-deep in muddy water mascara streaking down her face, screaming at investors who suddenly understood they'd lost everything. There was this awful breath-holding pause right before it went under, that split second when everyone knew there was no stopping it. And the part that still makes my hands shake when I think about it, I didn't sabotage a thing. I just stepped aside and let the law and nature do what they were always allowed to do. My name is Sebastian Thornfield. I'm 52 years old, recently divorced, and 6 months before all of this exploded, I inherited the only place that ever truly felt like home. A private 12-acre lake my grandfather spent most of his adult life building and protecting. After the divorce, after the lawyers, after writing alimony checks that felt like salt in an open wound, that lake was supposed to be my reset, my quiet place. The kind of place where the mornings smell like pine and water instead of burnt coffee and regret. A weathered fishing cabin, a natural shoreline, bass so big people thought I was exaggerating when I talked about them. The problem was where that lake sat, right in the heart of Willowbrook Estates. If you've ever seen one of those master-planned suburban developments, you already know the type. $500,000 houses lined up like soldiers, lawns so perfect they look spray-painted green, not a single leaf out of place. Everything controlled, everything measured. My grandfather's lake didn't fit that picture. The shoreline was wild, the trees weren't trimmed into submission. It looked alive, and that apparently made it a target. I knew I was in trouble the first morning I heard heels clicking on gravel. I hadn't even finished my coffee when I smelled jasmine perfume so strong it hit me before I saw her. Then came the sound, sharp, rhythmic, deliberate designer heels marching up my gravel driveway like they owned it. She was tall, stiff, bottle blonde hair shellacked into place, oversized sunglasses, a white BMW idling behind her like a status symbol on standby. She had a clipboard in one manicured hand and a measuring tape in the other. She didn't introduce herself like a normal human being. She just looked past me, pointed toward the water, and said, "Mr. Thornfield, your water feature is non-compliant." Water feature, like my grandfather's life's work was a decorative fountain she didn't approve of. Her name was Vivian Blackstone, 58 years old, president of the Willowbrook Homeowners Association. I later found out her license plate actually read HOA Boss. And no, I'm not joking. That should have been my first clue this woman had turned petty authority into a full-time personality. She started pacing my shoreline like a predator, marking territory, snapping that measuring tape, scribbling notes. She explained slowly, like she was doing me a favor, that the HOA had recently updated its environmental setback requirements. Any water feature exceeding 10,000 square feet now required a comprehensive environmental impact study. I told her the lake had been there since 1962. I told her it was entirely on private land. I told her my grandfather built it before Willowbrook Estates even existed. She smiled in that tight, practiced way people do when they've already decided how this is going to end. $500 a day in fines, she said, plus attorney fees for enforcement actions. Then, as she turned to leave, she casually mentioned how the community had been exploring enhanced waterfront amenities, maybe an upscale dining experience, something that would really boost property values. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at my grandfather's old table surrounded by paperwork, digging through county records like I was researching my own execution. And that's when the pattern snapped into focus. The ordinance she cited had passed just weeks after my grandfather's obituary ran in the local paper. And Vivian Blackstone. She'd been on the planning commission that helped push it through. That's when I realized this wasn't about compliance. It was about acquisition. The pressure escalated fast. Letters, notices, fines. She filed an emergency zoning complaint accusing me of running an unlicensed commercial fishing operation because I'd let my 12-year-old nephew bring his Boy Scout troop over to fish for an afternoon. 48 hours notice for a county hearing. Not enough time to find real legal representation, but plenty of time for Vivian to pack the room with HOA loyalists wearing matching community standard shirts. She painted me as an environmental hazard, talked about mosquitoes, contamination, public safety. I stood there with a binder full of deed surveys and tax records proving 60 years of private ownership. I thought facts mattered. I was wrong. That's when she dropped the real bomb. She spread architectural renderings across the table like a magician revealing the final trick. The Willowbrook waterfront dining experience. A floating restaurant. Kayak rentals. Valet parking. Outdoor lighting bright enough to guide aircraft. She announced $300,000 in investor commitments already secured. Applause erupted around the room. I felt something crack in my chest. A week later, the real violation began. I woke up to diesel engines and backup alarms. A construction crew was setting up on my shoreline. Hard hats, a small crane, floating platform materials stacked like they were claiming foreign soil. The foreman showed me paperwork that looked official enough to stall any immediate intervention. I called the county. I called the police. Everyone shrugged and told me to sort it out through proper legal channels. Standing there in my bathrobe watching concrete and steel splash into water my grandfather used to fish at dawn, I felt smaller than I ever had in my life. That night I sat on the cabin steps and stared at the lake until the sky went dark. For the first time I thought about giving up, selling, walking away, letting her win. I asked myself if I was the problem, if maybe peace was worth surrender, if I was clinging to something that didn't belong in this world anymore. That was my lowest point. What pulled me back wasn't rage, it was memory. My grandfather used to talk about the beavers that lived upstream before development chased them out in the 80s, how they built dams, how the water flowed differently back then. And buried in those late-night research sessions, fueled by bad coffee and stubbornness, I found something else. Federal wildlife protection law, prior appropriation doctrine. When native species return to historic habitat, federal protection outranks local zoning. Every time. I didn't rush. I didn't cut corners. I built a team. A wildlife biologist who got genuinely excited talking about beaver recolonization. A retired Army Corps engineer who could read water flow like a language. An environmental lawyer who loved nothing more than dismantling corrupt HOA authority with federal statutes. They all told me the same thing. If beavers returned naturally, everything changed, and nature was already moving. Trail cameras caught a family scouting the old dam site upstream. 3 adults, 2 juveniles. I filed habitat restoration paperwork, documented everything, removed nothing except artificial barriers that had been blocking the creek for decades. And then I waited. While Vivian rushed construction toward opening night, the beavers went to work. Slow at first, then methodical. Logs stacked, water diverted. The lake level dropped inches, then feet. Stress fractures appeared in anchor points that were never designed for change. I watched from my grandfather's deck, calm for the first time in weeks. Opening night arrived like a bad dream. Guests stepped onto a platform already listing. Tables crept, wine glasses slid. When the final log snapped into place upstream, the water dropped another 2 feet in minutes. The platform groaned, appliances shifted, and then silence. It tilted, and it sank. Fire crews evacuated guests as Vivian screamed about sabotage. Investors demanded answers. Cameras rolled, and while chaos swallowed her dream, a black sedan pulled into my driveway. Insurance fraud investigators. Turns out Vivian had a pattern projects insured before permits failures timed perfectly for payouts. This one was just the most public. The final confrontation came at a county meeting she demanded accusing me of environmental terrorism. She stood at the podium listing damage figures that matched her insurance policy down to the dollar. That's when federal agents stood up badges out and put her in handcuffs in front of everyone she'd bullied for years. The room erupted. I didn't. I walked back to my lake, now quiet again, beavers working upstream like nothing had happened. Sometimes power doesn't come from fighting harder. It comes from knowing when to step aside and let the truth finish the job.